Hey friends, happy Jewish History Month. Did you know that May is American Jewish History Month? And generally in Los Angeles and most major cities, we start to recognize it towards the end of May, usually after Lag BaOmer and between Shavuot, generally, to coincide with certain Jewish holidays, not just religious Jewish holidays, but celebrations here in the United States, as well as Israel and internationally that are now recognized as Jewish Heritage Days. Generally, we always have a big major celebration at City Hall and throughout Boyle Heights within about the last week of the month of May, and as we're getting closer to the holiday of Shavuot. And during this time, we really like to share just some of the heritage of Boyle Heights and try to revive some of it. And one of the ways that we are always trying to revive some of the Jewish flavor of Boyle Heights is literally with food. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be teaching how to make one of the essentials for Jewish celebrations of Shabbat and also for the holidays for Central and Eastern European Jews, one of the ubiquitous staples that would have been known in this community when it was a thriving Jewish community. We're going to be making challah bread. We're going to be making egg bread that is traditionally used on Shabbat and holidays. And it's an enriched bread. So what is challah bread? Well, basically it's a brioche. It is a bread that has been enriched with extra fats such as eggs. Generally though in the brioche you would use things such as butter. Within the Jewish version we use instead oil because we don't mix meat and dairy within kosher foods, and since we're having generally with celebrations a meat meal traditionally, we instead change out the butter with oil. But basically, a challah bread is not very much different from brioche that you'll find. That isn't much different from traditional Catholic Easter bread or the Ukrainian quote-unquote babka. Let's see, it's not very different from some of the pan that we use for things such as Dia de los Muertos. Pan de Muerto is also a brioche, very similar to challah. We also use something very similar to make conchas, so stuff like this. So I'm going to be showing you how to make a very simple brioche, and believe it or not, you really don't need anything very special. All you just need is some very basic ingredients. And one of the things that is very important in the Jewish tradition is that we make bread. Bread is the main staple of a meal, and so challah bread tends to be one of these crowning things because it's really the main staple, the main crowning element of the traditional religious meal. And so there is great care in the way that we do it to make it as tasty as possible, make it as beautiful as possible. But there's also a certain reality that in the Jewish tradition, the way that we show love and the way that we show respect towards others is breaking bread. That's, we have such a tradition that's handed down even to us in the West that comes from this biblical idea of breaking bread. Bread is very essential. Indeed, in the Jewish tradition, the rabbis teach us that, ein gemach, ein Torah. Ein Torah, ein gemach. Where there's no flour, there is no Torah. There is no divine learning. Where there is no divine learning, there is no flour. There is this necessary need for any of us to be able to pursue any of our goals in life, be they physical, be they spiritual. We need to be well satiated, and the way that people try to satiate a family the most is by creating this challah bread, which is very well enriched. I'm going to show you how to make that today. Generally here, because we do not have a Jewish bakery anymore in Boyle Heights, most of the bread made for the Jewish community is out of our little kitchenette here. But I haven't been feeling great lately, so I want to kind of pass down what our recipe is here that we use for challah bread. Are you ready to learn? Here we go. Let's start doing this. So first, essentially what we need to start with is we need to start with our flour And we need to basically make sure that we have bread flour. It's essential that if we are going to be making bread, we want to use bread flour. It's going to have enough gluten to be able to give the fluffiness that we want for this. So make sure that you have this. Also, you want to make sure to have on hand instant dry yeast. And this is very important. We want instant dry yeast. So you don't really have to fuss too much about getting your yeast bread to rise. Are you ready to make this happen? Here we go. Okay, so what we need to do is that generally when we start with creating any type of yeast bread, we want to activate the yeast. And you don't necessarily need to do this for instant dry yeast because it's broken down that it's going to activate when it gets put with water. But I generally still like to go through the process, the traditional process of making sure that my yeast is actually bubbling a little bit before I start to add the extra ingredients and everything. So you want to make sure that your yeast is not too old. So what I do is I generally start with, because we're going to be using 3 3/4 cups of flour in order to make 2 small loaves of challah bread. And traditionally that's what this recipe, or 1 big one, but this is generally for making 2 small, family size, challah bread loaves. Generally, I start with just 3/4 of a cup of flour, and then I put in our yeast. And what we do is we put in basically 1 packet, or 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast, and we just mix it around. And then I start adding our water into this. And so I'm adding 3/4 of a cup water. And I'm mixing it in with just a small amount of the dough. Because it's instant dry yeast that's already activated, we should start seeing some bubbles with it right away. But, because we don't really need to wait for the activation process of this, because we are using active dry yeast, we're going to go on to adding just the rest of our ingredients that we need to this. And, in order to, complete the rest of our dough, we're going to need to add, of course, the rest of our flour. So what we're going to do is that we measure 3 level cups. Now, since we already have 3/4 of a cup, we put You don't need to pack your flour down that hard. Matter of fact, it's, best if you just lightly spoon it in, because you could really, by packing it down, you could really change the amount of flour that you use. So do not pack down your flour as you're doing that. And then what we're now going to do is we're going to add our eggs. So we're adding 2 eggs to this. In addition to this, because challah bread has a sweetness to it, we need to add some sugar. And so what we add is 1/4 cup of sugar. When you add that amount of sugar, you need to also add about double the amount of oil. So we have 1/2 cup of oil that we're adding to that. And all I do is start out with my wooden spoon, and here I'm making a mess because I'm so excited. But I just use my wooden spoon to begin to incorporate all of the wet and dry ingredients. And it starts to come together. Has a sticky dough with some shaggy outsides to it. And then once it starts to come together, it's no longer really too much sticking to the bowl. That's when you can get your hands in on it. And so here we go. And we just are making sure to also move around the dough. Using the palm of our hand, we're pressing the rest of the dry ingredients into it. And it should come together in surprisingly little time without you needing any type of standing mixer or anything. But we just keep moving it around and using our palm to move it around and incorporate all of these dry ingredients. And the thing is about it is that as you work with the dough, sometimes you'll find that it's a little too dry. If so, then what you need to do is just add, a little bit more water into it. And, but really you want to do that very conservatively, like really only adding about a tablespoon at a time. And we just want to work this. And usually it takes us about 5 minutes of working it this way for our dough to come together. So I'm just going to keep kneading this a little bit here. There's still some stickiness in the middle. So what I start to do is I also start to kind of pull it inside out in order to bring that sticky inside to the outside and incorporate these dry ingredients. So really what we do is we want to knead this for about 5 to 8 minutes, not more than 10 minutes. So I'm going to continue to knead this right here, and it should be together in just a moment. So now after kneading for about 5 to 7 minutes, what we have is this really nice, beautiful dough that has come together that is no longer so sticky, it's very smooth. And then what we do is that we actually, now at the end, we add our salt. And we're gonna add 1.5 teaspoons salt. Why do we do this last? It's because salt actually starts to retard the yeast. It starts to work against it. And so what happens is that it starts to deaden some of the effects of the yeast. So we add it last while giving dough a little bit of chance to get a head start. But we add our salt last into this, and I just, again, knead it in and create just a nice little smooth ball. And then what we do is that we transfer it into a greased pan in which we're going to let it rise. And we want to put it in a warm place where there isn't a draft. And especially if there's some great humidity, that also helps as well. And what we do is we put some saran wrap over it in order to keep it from drying out. And then what we do is that we're going to put it aside for about 2 hours in order for it to rise. And we actually have some dough that has been rising already for 2 hours. And this is it right here. And so we're gonna put this one aside to rise for the next 2 hours. And we're gonna start working with braiding this beautiful dough that we have that's already risen right here. So now we begin to work with our dough. And what we do is we just want to lightly flour our workspace, our board. We're going to take our dough out, and it's been inflating for a while. So what we're going to do is we are just going to slightly punch it down. But what we also need to do is we do, at this time, also need to divide it. And so what we're going to do is that we're making, this is enough to make 2 small family loaves. So what I do is that I cut it in half, and then these loaves, we're going to be doing a braided challah, which is common to German Jews from, the Rhineland all the way through Ukraine and to Russia, a place like this. It's very common in, the German and the Slavic traditions, and it's been something that's been incorporated into the Eastern European Jewish tradition and Central European Jewish tradition over time, especially in Yiddish communities. This braid has become one of the ways in which you beautify it. And so I'm going to cut it into 3 pieces because we're going to be making 3 braids. And so real quickly, what we need to do is that we get these pieces and we roll them out in order to make long ropes. And as we roll these, we want to roll from the center out in order to get them to come out at a kind of uniform size. And there we go. And and believe it or not, doing a beautiful braid is not that hard at all. So all we need to do is we get our 3 ropes and we pinch them together here at the top. And what we do is we start with the one on the right, and we go over, under, and we keep always working that way. Over, under, over, under, over, under. And then we pinch them together. And in no time, there we have it. One of our beautiful braided challahs. And we're going to be placing it on parchment paper. And the parchment paper helps us to make sure that it does not burn. And so there we got our braid. Now, challah bread doesn't only have to be in this braided fashion. You can also, make, rolls out of it in other ways. And believe it or not, even during the high holidays, we take a different shape, such as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We actually just make a big spiral, a circular challah, a round challah, and it's very simple. And I'm going to make just a mini round challah. All you do is you take whatever amount of dough that you're working with, and you just make a big tube out of it, and you roll it around until you get this round formation, tucking it right there at the bottom so that it doesn't come apart. And all of these, what we do is that we put them aside to rise for about an hour before we bake them. And so we're going to set these aside to rise for a little bit. for about an hour. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be topping these with some, with an egg wash and putting them into a hot oven. I'll show you that process next. And this is how our beautiful challah and our rolls look. So we've allowed our loaves to rise for an hour while also preheating the oven to 350 so that we can bake these loaves. But now that they've had their second and final rise, what we need to do in order to get that beautiful shine over them is we need to add an egg wash. And basically I just use a whole egg that I scramble up. Just add a pinch of salt to it. You definitely want to add just a pinch of salt to it. And you definitely want to use a very delicate pastry brush in order to just gently cover the entire surface of these beautiful challah loaves and rolls. And this is going to give it that beautiful golden brown shine. Some people only use the yolk, and you know, that's because they want to get a much darker color. But I hate wasting part of the egg. It's also odd because people ask you to use the yolk and some water when the egg white is mostly water. 90% of it is water, so you know there's really no reason to toss it away. The only thing to remember as you are putting the egg wash on this is that you want to make sure to turn your pan around so that you can get it on all sides and evenly distribute it. Now, you want to put a good layer on it, but you don't want to leave a very thick layer. You don't want it to pool, because if you let it pool too much, what happens is that it's not going to leave a beautiful shine. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to scramble, and we don't want it to scramble. And so we're going to add the egg wash onto these rolls. And how long are we going to bake them? Well, for 1 pound loaves, it takes about 25 to 35 minutes of baking for them to finally be completely done, cook through, and have that wonderful, wonderful golden brown color that we're looking for. Now for the rolls, it probably takes about 15 to 20 minutes for them to be done, so we might have to take them out. I'll be monitoring them. But again, we want to make sure to get egg wash on all the surfaces all around. And you know, later, as we're later in our week, we'll also do a water challah recipe, a vegan challah recipe, and we'll show how you can get a beautiful sheen without egg as well. And but now that we've added this beautiful egg wash onto it, you know, feel free to go ahead and add whatever tasty embellishments you want. And for some of these, I'm gonna put some sesame seeds. Put some sesame seeds on these rolls. and our mini challah rolls. And then we pop these into the oven to bake. And so that's what I'm gonna do right now. Okay, so while we're waiting for our bread to finish baking, what we're gonna talk about for a moment is why we call it challah bread. And challah does not mean bread. Lechem means bread. So what does challah mean, and why do we call this special festive bread that is used on Shabbat and during the Jewish holidays? Why do we call it challah? And it's because of a special mitzvah, a special blessing that we say over this bread, and a very special tradition that harkens back to ancient times. Now, the word challah comes from the word halal, which means a space, an opening, a hollow. And how that's interpreted by the rabbis in the rabbinic Jewish tradition is that you are separating something, you're leaving a hollow inside something that you are setting aside for a certain purpose. What is this purpose for challah? Well, in ancient times, it was commanded in the Torah that the Jewish people were to give a tithe to the priests, to the Levites, who, because they served the Jewish people in Jerusalem and throughout the land, they did not have their own land. They weren't able to farm for themselves or take care of themselves in the normal ways that people do in an agrarian society. So what they were dependent on is people giving a tithe, 10% of their produce, and also things such as their bread. You would literally give, the bread that was necessary. You would give part of your own food and of your own, produce in order to help support the people who were doing the spiritual work of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel. And so what happens is that now in these modern times, of course, and since the destruction of the temple, we do not have Levites serving in Jerusalem in this way, and there's no sacrifices or offerings that are given in these types of things, and that type of priestly service has ended. However, we do want to hearken back our gratitude towards God and to those who serve our people. So what we do is that we do a commandment, a rabbinic commandment that is given to us in order to say a blessing in removing part of this dough, which we will use as just a symbolic sacrifice. And after we say the blessing of it, what we do is we just wrap it up in foil, we throw it in the bottom of our oven, and it incinerates up. And after that, we just, get rid of it in like the garbage disposal after removing any type of, rubbish or anything might be there, because it was a mitzvah item. We treat it respectfully, but we get rid of it in a very clean manner. And so that's normally what we do, is we just burn it up at the bottom of the oven, and in a little bit of foil, and then we get rid of it down the drain. But it's important for us to remember that this tradition of having beautiful showbreads as part of our tradition to kind of show the kind of pride of our society has been for millennia. And so we hearken back 3,000 years to this tradition as we separate challah, and that's what this mitzvah is, and that's why we call it challah bread, is because normally in order to do the mitzvah of challah, you need to have almost about 10 cups of flour in order for you to have a large enough lump in order for it to qualify for it to be, one of these sufficiently in size in order to say this mitzvah. And since we're doing a lot of dough today, we're definitely falling into that. So I do need to separate challah. So let us say the blessing as we separate the dough from this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lechafrish challah min ha'isa. And you say Amen, and I just take a part of this. Like I said, we throw it in the bottom of the oven in order for it to incinerate, and this becomes our symbolic offering. But now, because we've done this blessing, we have infused this dough with intention, and it has become holy. That doesn't mean it's become radioactive and magical, but that we have infused this with spiritual intention, and by saying a blessing, this now becomes a sacred form of worship, just making bread and eating it. That's how simple spirituality is sometimes, is us just deciding to take everyday, ordinary things and make them extraordinary with a little bit of attention. And that's what the mitzvah of Challah teaches us. Now we need to go check on our loaves. Let's go do that. So while we're waiting for our challah bread to bake in the oven, we're going to learn a little bit about why we call it challah bread. Why do we call it this? One of the things that's important for me to let people know is that challah does not mean bread. Lechem is bread. But challah, why do we call it challah? And there's a very important reason why we use this word for this special bread that is used on Shabbat and during the high holidays, and for this very festive bread. And first of all, the word challah comes from the word halal, which means a piercing, an opening, a hollow. The way that's interpreted by the rabbis in the rabbinic tradition is the separating of something. You're separating something from a larger lump. And what our lump is dough. And so in the ancient times, we were commanded, in order to help society, and so here they are, my friends, our little challah rolls and our 1 pound challah loaf. They have baked beautiful to golden brown. And what we need to do, though, is that before we cut these up and serve these, we want to make sure to let them rest for at least a couple hours, for them to finish on the inside, and for the steam inside of it to settle back inside of it. And we don't want them to collapse, and we don't want them to dry out. So do make sure to let them rest for a couple hours. But this is our beautiful homemade challah bread and our challah rolls. And as you see, they're really quite simple to make. And we hope that we're able to continue to keep these traditions alive, handing them down from generation to generation, so that people can continue to keep the Jewish flavor and the Jewish spirit of Boyle Heights alive. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this special baking presentation for Jewish History Month. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the month of May. We do plan on having the museum open for the rest of the month in celebration of Jewish History Month. And we will also be doing some special food presentations for the upcoming holiday of Shavuot, in which we celebrate the giving of the 10 Commandments at Sinai. And we're going to be celebrating our 3-year anniversary and the 5-year anniversary of our exhibit here at Boyle Heights History Studios. And so there's so much that is still going on here. So do come out and see us. We're basically open every day except for Monday from 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. If the door is ever locked, our phone number is right on the front door. So just give us a call and we can open right up in order for you to experience our wonderful exhibit here that is produced for us by the UCLA Allen D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies. And it's our wonderful exhibit from Brooklyn Avenue to Cesar Chavez, Jewish Histories in Multi-Ethnic Boyle Heights. And we're looking forward to, in the month of July, finally releasing our Barrio Mobile History Studio, which is going to be a portable, newly updated version of this exhibit that has already been teaching people so much vital history about our shared history of multi-ethnic Boyle Heights The wonderful ways in which Boyle Heights has taught this country and the world so much about inter-community cooperation. And I'm so proud to be able to represent not just the Jewish community, but the Mexican American and Chicano community here by keeping our shared flavors alive. So thank you for joining us, and join us for some of our upcoming cooking lessons. I think one of the next ones we're going to be doing is one of the vegan challah lessons, so that people can learn the basics of challah bread and brioche in order to be able to reuse these in different types of cultural treats that are celebrated throughout the year, in which those are kind of the base on which we are creating new palettes for the cycle of the life cycle events in our faith traditions, in our shared cultural traditions as well. So I'm the Wagner Wojcik, Shmuel Gonzalez, founder of Boyle Heights History Studios Museum and Cultural Center. I want to wish you a happy Jewish Heritage History Month. Be well, everyone. Sei gesund.